Imagine a man who seems to have won the game of life. At just 38, Chinzee wasn't just a billionaire. He was an Oka, a prestigious title of lord, and a personal advisor to the Prime Minister of Cambodia. His Prince Group empire felt omnipresent, spanning luxury real estate, banking, and private jets. To the public eye, he was the face of the new Cambodia, wealthy, influential, and utterly untouchable. He spent his days acquiring Picasso paintings and his nights in the inner circles of power, safe behind the shield of a Cambodian passport he'd purchased years ago. For a long time, he seemed to exist above the law. When the US and UK slapped sanctions on his businesses, the Cambodian government didn't blink, coolly stating they need sufficient evidence before taking action. Even as reports surfaced of slave camps hidden behind the barbed wire of a sprawling compound where thousands were allegedly forced to siphon billions from victims across the globe, Chinzee remained a free man. He even had associates reach out to high-ranking officials in Beijing, confident that his connections could solve any legal threats. But then, the air in Phnom Penh suddenly changed. This past Wednesday, the Lord didn't appear at a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a high society gala. Instead, he appeared on Chinese state television. The footage was jarring. The man who once flew in private luxury was now being led down the stairs of a plane, his head covered in a black hood, his wrists bound in cold steel. In a heartbeat, his ironclad protection had vanished. The Cambodian government, which had shielded him for a decade, had quietly handed him over to Chinese authorities. What caused this sudden dramatic reversal? Why would Cambodia sacrifice one of its most powerful economic titans to Beijing, especially when the U.S. Justice Department was already circling him with a $15 billion cryptocurrency seizure? As it turns out, the fall of Chinzee isn't just a story about a crackdown on scams. It's a glimpse into a high-stakes geopolitical tug-of-war, where being untouchable only lasts until you become more valuable as a pawn.
That is... wow. I mean, that opening really just lays out the entire puzzle, doesn't it? This isn't just a simple arrest. It's a piece of high-stakes theater.
It really is, and that's what we want to do in this deep dive. Our mission is to use this spectacular downfall as a map. We want to unpack the criminal ecosystem that lets someone like Chinzee thrive, the massive economic threat it all represented, and what this signals about a new kind of security paradigm emerging in Southeast Asia.
It's the perfect case study. It's where transnational crime slams right into geopolitics.
Exactly. So before we get into the man himself, let's just set the scale, because I think people hear scams and they think of, petty fraud. This is something else entirely.
Oh, it's a different universe. We're talking about an industry that generates tens of billions of dollars a year. Globally, it's an industrial-scale criminal enterprise.
And the numbers for Cambodia specifically are they're hard to believe.
They're staggering. The estimated revenue from just one type of scam, the pig butchering scams we'll get into, was around US $12.8 billion in Cambodia in a single year.
$12.8 billion. Let's put that in context. What was Cambodia's official GDP?
Well, that's the truly shocking part. In 2023, Cambodia's entire gross domestic product was about US $31.7 billion.
Oh, wait. The revenue from this one criminal scheme was almost half the country's entire official economy.
Almost half. And when you have that kind of ratio, you're not talking about a crime problem anymore. You're talking about a fundamental distortion of the state. Illicit money on that scale doesn't just run parallel to the legitimate economy, it starts to hijack it.
It warps all the incentives.
Completely. The money isn't being reinvested in schools or roads. It's laundered, it's siphoned offshore, and it's used to buy the political protection that keeps the whole machine running.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Let's dive into the man at the center of this, Chinzee, and what some are calling the role shifter model.
Right. So role shifter is the perfect term for him. He wasn't just a gangster hiding in the shadows. He was a master at juggling these different personas. The legitimate billionaire businessman, the high-level political insider, and the alleged kingpin of a massive criminal syndicate.
And he used one role to legitimize and protect the others.
That's the key. It was a system. So he's born in China, but in 2014 he buys Cambodian citizenship. Not long after, he gets the title Onka, which is that lord title you mentioned, and becomes an advisor to the prime minister.
So he embeds himself directly into the power structure. He isn't just paying for protection from the outside, he becomes part of the protective layer itself.
Exactly. And you have to remember the context. Cambodia consistently ranks as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. So for someone like him, that environment wasn't a bug, it was a feature. His legitimate businesses, like Prince Bank and all the real estate, they provided the perfect hover.
And public face.
The public face and the cash flow to keep the patronage system well-oiled. All while, according to the allegations, his criminal operations were running unimpeded.
And those allegations.
Yeah.
Let's get into the U.S. Department of Justice indictment from October 2025. This wasn't just about financial fraud.
No, not at all. The charges were wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering conspiracy, but the core of the indictment alleged that Prince Group was running forced labor camps. We're talking about thousands of people allegedly held against their will, coerced, even tortured.
All to carry out these massive crypto investment scams.
Right. It's modern-day slavery fueling a digital fraud empire.
The numbers that the prosecutors were throwing around are almost unbelievable. How much were they saying this network generated?
They alleged the network was pulling in up to $30 million per day.
30 million a day. That's over $10 billion a year.
It is. The scale is industrial. And that's why the U.S. enforcement action was so huge. It led to the single largest cryptocurrency forfeiture in U.S. history.
Right. The seizure of, what was it, 127,000 Bitcoin?
127,271 Bitcoin, to be exact. Valued at the time at roughly 15 billion U.S. dollars.
15 billion. I mean, from a law enforcement perspective, how do you even handle that? It's not like seizing a bank account. You have to physically control the crypto.
It's a massive logistical and technical challenge. The DOJ has to work with crypto experts to secure the private keys for all those wallets, which is incredibly complex. And then they can't just dump all that Bitcoin on the market at once.
It would crash the price.
It would crater it. So they have to come up with a sophisticated strategy to liquidate it over time without destabilizing the entire crypto market. It's a completely new frontier for asset forfeiture.
And it all traces back to the brutality inside those scam compounds. Let's talk about the modus operandi there. These weren't like hidden jungle camps.
No, not always. Many were purpose-built, walled facilities inside what looked like legitimate casinos or special economic zones. They had a veneer of legality, but inside, they were just factories for fraud and exploitation.
And the main scheme they were running is this pig butchering. The name itself is chilling.
The Chinese term is shazupan, and it's brutally descriptive. The pig is the victim, and the scammer's job is to fatten them up with trust before the butchering, taking all their money.
So how does it work?
It's a long game. An operator, often using a fake profile, will spend weeks, sometimes months, building a deep emotional connection with the target online. It could be a romance, it could be a close friendship.
So they're investing a huge amount of time to build that trust.
A huge amount. Then, once the trust is absolute, they'll casually introduce a supposedly foolproof investment opportunity, almost always involving a sleek-looking crypto platform. They'll let the victim make a few small, profitable withdrawals at first to build confidence.
Fattening the pig.
Exactly. And once the victim is convinced they've found the secret to financial freedom, they're pressured to invest their life savings. And then, poof, the platform disappears, the friend is gone, and the money is lost forever.
And the horror is that the person running the scam is often a victim themselves.
That's the dual victim structure that makes this so uniquely evil. The workers inside are often victims of human trafficking. They're lured from their home countries with promises of high-paying tech jobs, and as soon as they arrive, their passports are taken.
And they're tracked.
Trapped and forced to meet brutal scamming quotas. If they fail, they face violence, torture, or being sold like property to another scam compound. It's a horrifying cycle of exploitation.
So if you're moving $30 million a day, you need some serious financial plumbing. This isn't something you can do with traditional banks.
No way. The whole operation relies on the speed and anonymity of cryptocurrency and what are called virtual asset service providers, or VASPs. Think of them as crypto exchanges or wallet services. They allow for instant cross-border transfers that are incredibly hard for law enforcement to track in real time.
And the key player here, the one the U.S. went after, was the Huani Group.
Right. Huani was the perfect example. It marketed itself publicly as Alipay in Cambodia, a legitimate payment service. But behind the scenes, blockchain analysis showed it was a massive laundromat.
How massive?
FinCEN, the U.S. Treasury's financial crimes unit, traced between $70 and $89 billion in crypto transactions through their platform since 2021.
Billions with a B. And it was linked to
the biggest scam syndicates in the region, including Prince Group. And very significantly, it was also linked to state-sponsored actors like the Lazarus Group, the North Korean hacking collective.
Okay, so that's a game changer. When you're talking about North Korean state hackers using the same financial network as these scam compounds, the threat level just skyrockets.
It becomes a national security issue, not just a law enforcement one. And that's why the U.S. response was so severe. FinCEN used a tool they rarely break out.
Section 311 of the Patriot Act. Explain what that is in simple terms.
Think of it as the financial world's nuclear option. The U.S. Treasury can designate a foreign financial institution as a primary money laundering concern.
Which sounds bad.
It's the end of the line. Once that designation happens, no U.S. bank, and by extension, almost no major international bank that deals in dollars, is allowed to do business with them.
So you're basically unplugging them from the entire global financial system.
You're cutting off their oxygen. And it worked. Almost overnight, Huonie Pay branding started disappearing from storefronts in Phnom Penh. It showed that even a crypto-based criminal network has pressure points that can be squeezed.
So the financial walls were closing in, but that still doesn't explain how the man at the very top, the untouchable Chinzee, finally fell. Which brings us to the geopolitics.
Exactly, because this is where the story pivots from finance to a high-stakes political trade-off. For years, Cambodia shielded him. The U.S. and U.K. hit him with sanctions targeting over 140 of his companies in October 2025, and Cambodia's response was basically, we'll look into it.
A diplomatic shrug.
A total shrug. But then, just a few months later, he's arrested and extradited. And the key detail is that it happened after a joint investigation with China.
So the big question is why? Why the sudden reversal? Why hand him over to Beijing when the U.S. was already building this massive $15 billion case against him?
And that's the first major piece of this geopolitical puzzle, what we're calling the restoration of order. And that order was dictated by Beijing's strategic interests. The analysis suggests that China became far more concerned about Chinzee falling into American hands than Cambodia was about protecting him.
Why? What was the fear?
Information, leverage. Remember, Chinzee's executives were openly bragging that they had connections in Beijing who could solve any legal problems. If he's extradited to the U.S., he's facing life in prison. He has every incentive to cooperate.
And tell U.S. prosecutors everything.
Everything about his financial dealings, his political connections in Cambodia, and potentially compromising details about high-level corruption or intelligence matters involving officials in China. For Beijing, that kind of information leaked to a geopolitical rival is a nightmare scenario.
So by swooping in and securing the extradition themselves, they control the narrative. They contain the damage.
Precisely. They get to be seen as the ones cleaning up the region, cracking down on crime that victimizes their own citizens, and they prevent a massive intelligence coup for the U.S.
And the move was so coordinated. It wasn't just the arrest.
Oh, it was perfectly synchronized. At the exact same time he was being extradited, the National Bank of Cambodia moved in and ordered the complete liquidation of Prince Bank, his flagship legitimate business.
So it was a total dismantling of his empire, both criminal and legitimate, in one fell swoop.
It was a visceral display of state power. It sent a message that the Wild West days were over and that institutional authority was being reasserted. The rules had changed overnight.
Which leads to the second big story here. This isn't just about punishing crime. It's about replacing one kind of economy with another, moving from this parasitic scam model to actual physical development.
Yes, and this is crucial for understanding China's long-term play with the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. There's a great anecdote in the source material about an engineer, Lao Li.
The guy who went to Sihanoukville to work on real BRI projects.
Right, and he's there to build ports and roads, real infrastructure, but he looks around at all these glittering new skyscrapers and casinos built by groups like Prince Group.
The scam compounds.
And he calls them hollow monuments because they look like development, they look like wealth, but they're just shells. They don't create sustainable jobs or a tax base. They're part of a parasitic economy that just siphons money out of the country.
And it gives legitimate development a bad name. You can't attract real long-term investment if your city's main industry is human trafficking and global fraud.
You absolutely cannot. It destroys the business climate. It undermines the rule of law. So for China, cracking down on this isn't just about justice. It's about clearing the ground for the real economic projects, like the Langking-Mekong Economic Development Belt. You have to remove the rot before you can build something solid.
So when the sources talk about replacing digital decadence with civilizational resilience, what does that mean in practice?
Digital decadence is the hollow, fast money economy of the scams. It's ephemeral and destructive. Civilizational resilience is the long-term, tangible development of the BRI. It's real factories, real supply chains, real infrastructure that creates stable societies. It's about replacing the parasitic model with a productive one.
Okay, that makes sense. And that brings us to the third big theme in this shift. seeing this massive law enforcement push as a kind of a collective survival strategy for the whole region.
It really is. The thing about telecommunication fraud and human trafficking is that it's a shared threat. It doesn't respect borders or ideologies. The victims are American, Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese, everyone.
It creates a very pragmatic reason for countries to cooperate, even if they have other political disagreements.
Exactly. It's what analysts call building strategic trust. You don't start with a big abstract treaty. You start by working together on a concrete problem that's hurting all of you. And the success of those operations builds the trust needed for deeper cooperation later.
And the numbers on these joint operations are just wild.
They are. Between August and December of 2024, joint operations between China and its neighbors, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, resulted in the deportation of over 70,000 suspects.
70,000 people in 4 months. That's not just a few raids. That's a coordinated region-wide campaign. It implies a level of intelligence sharing and operational sync that we haven't really seen before in this area.
It's unprecedented. And every successful operation, like the one in Cambodia that netted 240 suspects in November 2024, reinforces the model. It proves that collective action works. It forces these smaller, compromised states to choose between protecting a local corrupt patron and participating in the collective security of the entire region.
And eventually, the pressure from the major power becomes too great to ignore.
The alternative is to be seen as a failed state, a hub of instability on the border of a superpower. And for a country like Cambodia, that's just not a viable long-term strategy.
So Chinzee is gone. His empire is being dismantled. But the problem isn't solved, right? This criminal ecosystem is designed to survive.
Yeah.
That brings us to the challenges that still remain.
Right. The biggest challenge is that this industry is like a liquid. It's incredibly mobile and adaptive. You squeeze it in one place and it just flows somewhere else.
So they get pushed out of the big flashy compounds in Sihanoukville. Where do they go?
They move to more remote, less governed areas. Think of border regions like Kokong in Cambodia, or they shift operations into neighboring countries where law enforcement might be weaker. It's a constant game of whack-a-mole for the authorities.
Which really points to the root cause: weak governance in these specific zones.
That's the core issue. These special economic zones, or SEZs, were often allowed to operate with very little government oversight. They became fiefdoms where corruption flourished. The main policy recommendation now is that national governments have to reassert control over these areas.
But you can't just shut them all down, can you? I mean, there are legitimate businesses and workers in those zones, too.
That's the dilemma. If you just close an SEZ, you could create a massive unemployment crisis overnight, which just creates more desperation for criminals to exploit. So any crackdown has to be paired with real alternative economic development plans. You have to offer a legitimate path forward.
Meanwhile, the U.S. was running its own play against Chinzee long before this extradition. Let's talk about their all-tools approach, the Scam Center Strike Force.
Right. This is so important. The U.S. strategy, announced in November 2025, was a recognition that you can't fight a networked problem with a single agency, so they brought everything to the table.
So let's break down the three main tools they used. First up, the Department of Justice.
The DOJ brings the hammers: criminal prosecution and asset forfeiture. Their biggest move was obviously the $15 billion crypto seizure. That took a huge amount of money off the board and proved that digital assets aren't a safe haven. They bring the criminal charges that put people in prison.
Okay, then you have OFAC, the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. They're more like a scalpel.
A very sharp scalpel. OFAC uses targeted sanctions. They designated 146 individuals and entities tied to Prince Group. The moment that happens, any assets they have in the U.S. are frozen, and they're effectively blacklisted from the global financial system. For a guy like Chinzee, who's buying Picasso paintings, that hurts.
It cuts off his access to the legitimate world.
Precisely. And the third tool is FinCEN, which we already talked about.
Right, the systemic weapon.
They go after the infrastructure. By using Section 311 on Hyoni Group, they didn't just target one person or company, they took out an entire financial pipeline that the whole network relied on. It was the combination of DOJ's prosecutions, OFAC's targeted sanctions, and FinCEN's systemic pressure that really made the situation untenable.
So it was this combination of massive U.S. financial pressure and decisive Chinese security action that finally broke the stalemate. Cambodia was squeezed from both sides.
Exactly. The protection racket just became too expensive and too risky to maintain. It's a powerful example of how multilateral, multi-domain pressure can bring down an empire that thought it was too big to fail.
Before we wrap up, we have to talk about the other costs, the harms that go beyond the financial losses. the damage this did to the rule of law, and the danger for people who tried to expose it.
This is such a critical and often overlooked part of the story. When a criminal enterprise gets this powerful, the state's own tools, the police, the courts, get turned against anyone who tries to tell the truth.
And the case of the journalist, Mekdara, is just a brutal example of this.
He was one of the key journalists investigating and reporting on these scam compounds, and for his work, he was arrested in September 2024 and charged with incitement.
A classic charge used to silence dissent.
A classic. After he was released, the pressure was so intense that he publicly apologized and announced he was quitting journalism to become a farmer. It's a chilling message. If you report on this, we will destroy you.
And it wasn't just journalists. Even people trying to rescue the victims were targeted.
Right, the story of Chinzee. He was a Chinese businessman who was running a charity to help rescue trafficked workers from the compounds. He was arrested and jailed for 10 months. It shows the system wasn't just turning a blind eye. It was actively protecting the criminal enterprise by persecuting those who tried to help its victims.
Wow. So when we pull all of this together, the rise of the untouchable lord, the slave camps, the global finance, and the sudden dramatic fall, what's the big takeaway?
I think the key insight is that Chinzee's downfall wasn't really about one country's justice system finally working. It was much more about a cold, calculated, high-level political decision. Major powers, primarily China, decided that the regional instability and the massive fraud against their own citizens had become a bigger problem than the profits the patronage network was generating.
His existence became more valuable as a pawn to be sacrificed than as an asset to be protected.
That's it, exactly. And the fact that his extradition and the liquidation of his bank happened in the same breath sends a powerful message. It shows that in this new era, being untouchable is just a temporary state of affairs. The collapse of the Prince Group demonstrates that even the most powerful, politically shielded criminal empires built on digital fraud are ultimately vulnerable when the threat they pose to regional stability and to the citizens of major powers becomes too big to ignore. At that point, the compromised states protecting them are forced to choose, and they will always choose collective security over corrupt patronage.